everyone and welcome back to another video on my Adobe Photoshop series 2 where I am talking about filters. And today the filter what we are talking about is the blur filter. All the blur filters are there, but the main standard go-to blur filter is your Gaussian blur filter. And along with this, I'll be telling what other filters does for different pictures and how you can use them with your gradient tool or with your masking tool. So let's get into it. So I have actually opened 4 pictures here of 4 different lightings and 4 different like shoots. Like imagine here the background is already blur and the focus is especially on this book opened. And here also it's almost like a foggy, it's not blur but it's like a foggy finish. And here also there is some blur area and the focus is on the water and this person jumping in. And in this picture it's total cloud, means they are not like 100% blur, they are partial blurs. So now first of all what I'll do is I'll just create a duplicate of all the pictures. I'll go to my each layer and I'll say Ctrl J to make a duplication. Again I'll go and click onto this and say Ctrl J. I want to just clear everyone that these pictures are not opened as a new document. I have opened them like file, open and get a picture from your gallery, because might be some of my pictures like this picture's dimension is different compared to this picture or this picture. So I have not created any document of a particular size or anything. I have just opened a very good HD quality pictures. If you want to use the same pictures, I will leave the link in the description box. I have downloaded them from the unsplash.com. It provides a very good HD quality. You can download them for free and you can try it out. All the filters, you can have a experiment where you can mix and match them and see what works better for you. Okay, so here I've already taken a duplicate of my layer. Now this is my background. I'll just close it. So my layer is here and what I am thinking is to apply a blur to it. Okay, so this is my picture. Before applying to blur, I'll just take a copy of it again. Alright, so I have already a copy and I took another copy of it. For this one, I'll just name it as Smart Object. I'll tell you what smart object actually I'm going to do with. So right now I'll just switch it off and I'll keep it as usual. It is a picture now, that is a JPEG form, and I will go to my filters, I'll go to my blur and I'll apply the very standard blur, that is your Gaussian blur. See, the moment I click onto the blur, he automatically gives me this box. Every blur gets a box with you. And this is blur where you have, some of them will have numbers, some of them will have scrollers like this, and to what percentage you want to blur them, you can go up to 1000. From the 0.1 till 1000 you can go, and you can actually make it completely like a gradient look or a smudgy look. You can use this as a background for your text or some other photo effects, but my intention is to give a little blur where my picture and my book, especially the book, because anyhow the background is if I switch off the preview, you can see the background is already blur, but my book is the focused, or it is much clear and sharp edges. But if I enable the preview, you can see now my book is also being blurred. And I'll say okay. So what happened is the blur has been applied to this picture. Now suddenly I remember that I want to change the blur settings onto this picture. Like might be I wanted a little more blur, or I want to reduce a little blur. Might be I want anytime retouching of it till I finish the complete photo editing. The one thing that you can do here is you can actually make this picture into a smart object, and you will have ability to make your picture into a smart object, and the scroller remains there and you can edit them anytime. So right now this is the picture where my blur is applied. See, if you see, this is the picture, right? So I'll just put it at the last. I will just take him below and keep it there and switch it off. Now I'll come back to my smart object layer. I have not done anything on this layer, I have just renamed it. Now I will right click onto the now I will right click on here and I will say convert to smart object. And you see what is the difference between a normal layer and a smart object layer is you get a small icon at the edge here. At the corner of your preview of your layer, you get this shape. It means that your picture has turned into a smart object. Now if I go to filter and if I go to blur and take my Gaussian blur, and might be I'll apply a little more, 2x's, and the blur has been applied, the blur has been applied an excess amount. Now I am thinking to change the blur settings. Might be I want to reduce it so at least I can make the differentiation between. So what I can do is either I can double click onto this Gaussian blur name and I get back the same box and I can reduce the blur. It's just like a little tiny blur so that my letters are being blurred, that's it, and I'll say okay, like that. Or I can just click onto this icon, you can see here, double click onto this, you get this box here. You can work with the opacity of your blur. Okay, before coming to here, I'll just go back to my Gaussian blur, double click onto it, and I'll give a little high blur, like something more like this. Okay, I've given a high amount of blur. Now I'll double click onto this icon in the corner and I get this box. Here I can reduce the opacity of my blur. Like you see, it gives a very lens dramatic fairy tale kind of effect to it, because he is partially blur and partially the original whatever is it, whether the original picture is blurred or it is a very fine edged picture, whatever is it. So it is 50% of the blur and 50% of its original effect. So now I have reduced it, or I can go for other effects also. These are the layer modes. I can give multiply. You see, this is how it comes. And now if I increase the blur, see, you can change different effects, and yeah, this is how it has come up. So it looks like it's in a night mode and the book is being focused while clicking, like might be the sun is setting kind of lighting on this book. So yeah, that's how you can change it into a smart object, right? So now I'll go to another picture. This is a picture of a tree. I'll just zoom in. How do you zoom in? Control plus and you will go for one step. Another time when you press again Control plus, how many ever times hold down to your control and keep on pressing the plus symbol next to your backspace. If you press it for one time, he will be zoomed for one time. Now see, if I press it again, you can see he is zooming in here. See, 50 and then another 33% for it, and then 100 and then 200, 300, like that. It keeps on getting blurred. So I'll just keep it to this extent and it's more than enough. Now I want to show you another two different filters which are almost the same. There's not much big effect or difference onto it. Again that I'll do is the blur, and this time I'll go for blur. He just added a blur, that's it, nothing much. See, if I go again and added multiple times, like 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, and so many times. I guess I applied more than 10 times. Now you can see it is getting blurred. Now if I switch it off, this is the original picture. See, this is the background picture what I had open, and now after getting blurred, this is how it looks. So it is more like a smooth finish and the blur has been happening. Now what I'll do, I'll put this up in the below. I'll just off this blur layer, so I'll just label it as BLUR so that I'll have a difference. Again, I'll go back to my original picture. I'll hit Ctrl and J for duplication. For this, I'll label it as blur more. So there is one more filter in your blur that is called as blur mode. I'll switch off my background. I'll go back to my filter. I'll go to blur and I'll go for blur mode. It is the same thing. What 2 times of blur will give you, he will give you in 1 time. That's the only difference you can find him. Now see, if I go to close enough, he has blurred it. Now if I switch it off, I'll just switch on the original. See, this is the original because he is on, and now if I on him, this is the blur. Now if I on top of him the blur, still no blur because I applied it more than 10 times and this one is applied only 2 times. So this is the difference between your blur and the original blur and more blur. Next I'll go to another picture which was already been which is this picture has already been duplicated. That is Control G to duplicate your picture. And then this time I'll go for the blur that is called as box blur. So what this box blur does is it also blurs, but it will make it into box form. You can see it's like a pixelated, see, box shape it will give you. So the blur is happening in form of a small pixels, and yeah, this is how the result is. But it is not just a randomly goes by the flow like a dot or anything, but it behaves like a square blur. For this I will try to use the gradient effect. Okay, so what I'll do a Control Z, right click and convert into smart object. Okay, and then what I'll do, I will go here and say blur, that is my box blur. Okay, it's already a box blur here, and I will say done. Okay, now I'll click on to my smart object and I'll go for gradient, click and drag. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just go to my gradient, and here in the gradient I'll pick the black and the white one. And you see I have selected the smart filter thing because I have converted this layer into a smart object, and I'm not on my layer, I'm actually on my mask. And now I will click and drag. You see the area which I have clicked and dragged is no more blur compared to the area where this man is actually jumping. Now if I go still more further, more the blur I am actually reducing. You can see here it is getting clearer and clearer, and here it is more blur. What we'll do is I will do it from the down. I'll take my gradient, I'll make sure I'm on my filter. You see, I'm getting clear from down. And how you can use your gradient on your mask of your smart filter in order to give a different blur effect. So this is how the box blur works. Now the next one, I will go for filter, blur and average blur. What that average blur actually does is he actually takes all the colors which are present in the picture, tries to get an average of all the colors, and he actually puts it in. So now if I select this layer and if I go for filter and if I say blur and average, I think this brownish black brownish kind of color was the average what he got, and he made it into that layer. So there is one more ways to do it. What I'll do is I will convert this layer first into my smart object. Very necessarily I will make a part of it as selection. Okay, now I'll go to filter, blur and I'll say average. See, only the area what I picked, he has made this into average. Now, but what if I select a small area here? I've already selected a small area. I'll go to my filter, blur and average. So what he actually did here is, if I hit Control D to deselect, he has actually picked that area which I took in my selection square, and he made that all the colors which were present in that particular area as my blur. Okay, and he made that into blur. Now again I'm on the same picture. I'll go back and I will pick here this all colors. Again I'll go to filter and say average. So what he did, he again brought the same average blur effect onto this area, and you can see the difference in colors of these both. You can create your own color palette from this. You can pick any picture which you like and you can just keep on drawing your square boxes and get a color palette. And you can actually go like take a eyedropper tool and click onto this. You will get the color here, and you can actually know what number is the color on, and you can save it or you can use it for your other purposes. Like see here, especially I go for HSP, so I know what it is in degree, percentage and so saturation and the brightness for it. And yeah, that is how you can work with your average blur. Now I'll come back to my first picture, which is already the blur. I'll switch off everything and I'll keep only my new layer on. And all of these I'll just unlock my background layer and I'll put all of these below it, because at the end I'll just go through everything, so I need them. And this is the original photo, and I'll hit Ctrl J again to make a duplicate, and this time I will apply the blur called as lens blur. So we'll just label it as lens blur. Okay, I have already selected. I'll go to filter, blur and pick up the lens blur. So he actually gives you a set of instruction and a different dialog box. it's just like you are putting the blur in your direct camera lens. You have now digital camera lenses, you are trying to do the blur and focus onto it. You can go for different shapes, different radius, different blade curvatures, all this for your blurring purposes. If I invert it, it will be like this is more blur and the focus is not there. If you want to blur the focus, you can go for that. Increase your size. See, the blur is actually happening. I took a square. What if I take a octagon? Okay, and if I increase the blade curvature or the rotation, the brightness, the threshold, the noise, if I want to add a noise also, I can add it. So this is the noise. I want it to be a Gaussian noise, not like another one. If you want to go for uniform noise, you can go for that also. It will be just like in a black and white kind. And then I can actually reduce, if I want to reduce the brightness, or if I want to reduce the threshold, I'll just remove the noise for now. And here I will increase the radius of my iris. It's just like you're clicking a camera for that. And if you say okay, and this is how the blur has happened, it's just like as if you're taking a direct picture from your camera lens. Okay, now we'll go for the next one. This picture is already there. First of all, unlock your pictures and put all your previous blurs below. This is your original image. Control plus J to make a duplicate on it. Again, with your left click, go to your filters, then pick your blur, and this time click motion blur. It's just like as if a blur has happened while taking a picture. You moved around and you get something like that. You can give the amount to what extent do you want the blur to happen, or if you have an angle, it will happen in that angle. And yeah, this is how the motion blur works. Okay, now we'll make one more. I'll just enable it as Control plus J for another blur. And I actually wanted to tell that thank you so much for all your support for my previous video, my series 1, where I spoke about the basics on Adobe Photoshop, and this is my series 2. I have moved a step up in my YouTube channel. It's all because of your support and appreciation. It means a lot for me, and thank you so much. And I hope I get much more love and support from you in my future videos. And yeah, I'm trying all my hard work and the best what I can achieve to bring the contents for you. Subscribe them, you can comment them, suggestions, all your suggestions and comments. I've tried my level best to apply in this series what I got in my previous series. And yeah, I am you can follow me on my Instagram account also, where I upload all my artworks. So let's get back to the class. And I have made in my class, before going for this short talk, I had just made a duplication of my original picture. I didn't give any name for it. So first of all, we'll go to blur and see which is the next one. It is called Radial Blur, and I'll just double click onto this and give it name as a Radial Blur. Okay, and I'll just switch off my original, and this is my new Radial Blur. I'll go to my filters, I'll go for blur, and I'll pick up the Radial Blur. What this Radial Blur actually does is he makes it into a different shapes and structures. See, now this is in a form of a round spinning Radial Blur. I'll just give a quality as best quality, and if I say okay, he will blur this in a form of round rings like structure. Okay, sometimes it will take time to process because as your effect is growing. So this is Radial Blur. So this is how it looks. It gives a very cool and kind effect if is really in a right position. Anyhow, this is the video and tutorial classes, so I just want to try it out in different pictures and show you the effects. So this is the before and the after picture. This Radial Blur brings in a little motion blur also along with it. Alright, so then I'll go for the next picture, and this picture has the previous effect. First of all, I'll go to my original picture and unlock it with my left click. I will click and hold with my left click the layer and put it down, and I'll switch it off. This is my original layer. I'll go for Control plus J and make a duplicate it, and this blur is actually called as shape blur. Okay, so I'll just select it and I'll go for filter, I'll go to blur and go for shape blur. See, the shape blur is actually, it will give the blur effect in a form of a shape. So where are these shapes actually coming from? They're actually coming from here, custom shapes. See, if I right click onto it, you have something called as custom shapes and tool. So whatever shape you make here, it will be available here. Animals, if you want to see them, or if you want to see the birds or flowers, or you have made something as your custom shape also, customly if you have made it, even that is be taken into my shape blur. So I'll just go back to my filter, I'll go to my blur, and I'll go for my shape blur. You can see here it is blurring here more and then here less, like that. But this area, if you see, actually it's to some extent it's actually clear. So yeah, he just take that shape and puts it into the blur form. Now we'll go for the next video. As you can see, the previous my average blur is here. I will double click and label it as average blur. Alright, so and I will go to my original picture and unlock it, pick my average blur and put it underneath it. This is my original. Control plus J to duplicate it, and which is my next blur here. It is called as smart blur. So I will double click onto it and I'll say smart blur. Okay, and I'll switch off all the layers underneath it. I'll keep my smart blur, go to my filter, blur, and pick up smart blur. Smart blur is just like, you can actually specify how much do you want to blur, how much do you want to keep, what is your quality, if you have any, like if you just want to keep the edges or overlay kind of blur. Okay, what smart blur does is you can actually retain your edges to some extent in this. And if I say okay, you can see the blur is happening. Let him finish his process. I'll show you what is the result. Surface blur also, see, this is like this. So what he does is he just highlights all the edges present. You can use it like a very different cool effect also, and only the areas what he is highlighting is blurred. You can see the area within this is completely blurred, whereas if you see here, it is still clear enough. It's not so smudgy or smooth finish, you cannot see. So that's your smart blur. Again I'll come back, again I'll use this smart blur. So now what I'll do is I will put this underneath it. This is my original layer. I'll switch it off and I'll make a copy of it. Control J, and this is actually called as surface blur. I'll just put this layer underneath it and switch it off. He's back here and I'll put the last blur. So I'll say Control J and label it as surface blur. Okay, this is the blur what I'm applying onto him. This is the last blur of today's class, and in the list of my blur, that is surface blur. So what this actually does is, if I focus onto some area, like if I focus onto this man and if I increase the threshold, see, he tries to maintain the edges and he smoothens the area within that. Okay, so it's just like your radiuses are there and your blur is happening within your surfaces. Now if I give 0 radius and if I keep on increasing the threshold, a little increase in radius is enough to give the blur. And you can see if I reduce the threshold, the edges are maintained and the blur is actually happening inside my edges. So it just blurs the areas within it, and it actually gives a kind, it is used for digital painting. I use it a lot for my digital painting and structures. And if you're using a digital painting where you make characters and prints for your digital work and stuff, then you can use this. It will help you to obtain your desired combination and mixing and blending of colors by not actually distracting your by not actually disturbing your edges of your shape. So yeah, these are all the different kinds of blur. If I just go for a quick review, the first blur was this blur where I have actually worked onto it. So this is my first blur where I added into a smart object and added my Gaussian blur, and then I work without the smart object. That is where I showed how the smart object works. And this is the lens blur where you get the box with different options and you need to pick up them. And here if I come back, the first blur was just a normal blur. This is my original picture and this is the blur. And if I go to more blur, is just like one click of your blur is actually equal to one click of your blur more is actually equal to 2 clicks in this. Like 2 times if you apply this will be equal to 1 time apply. That's only difference. Next, the motion blur is just like as if you took a picture while moving somewhere, and radial blur is also like that, but this is more in a form of a circular form. Next, you have all these blur. This is a surface blur which I just spoke. It will give you a blended effect. After that, the next one is this blur which you can use with your gradient tool. I had explained it because I converted into smart object, and you can see the gradient has been applied as a mask. And the next is shape blur. Whichever shape you try to add, the blur happens. Next one, here we worked with the average blur. I used my selection rectangle marquee tool and I selected the area here, and what he actually does is he picks all the colors that are present in that particular area and gets an average of the colors and gives you. You can use it to create your own custom color palettes. If in case you liked a picture and you want to pick some colors from it, you can give a selections and make around it. That is your average blur. Smart blur gives you some effect, like he tries to outline the area within which the blur is actually happening. So that's all the blurs of this class. I hope you have understood it. I hope it's not a too lengthy video, but I just wanted to explain each and every one with a particular way to work onto it. And I have also explained what are the different ways you can use your blur. You can use it with your gradient, with your selection tool. You can use it as a smart object. You can actually use with your adjustment layers also. And yeah, thank you so much. And my new art video processing, like a time-lapse video, will be there shortly. And stay tuned and see you soon. In my next video, I'll be basically talking about another blur gallery. These are much more interesting than these blurs because here it's only about values, but there you have much more than that. And yeah, I'll see you in the next class.